He was supposed to be picking me up from work that day, but of course, he was late. Again. It was one of those gray, heavy evenings when the sky can't decide if it wants to rain or just sit there looking miserable. The sidewalks were damp, the air smelled like wet concrete, and people were rushing past our building with umbrellas half open like they were too tired to commit. I stood under the little overhang outside the lobby, hugging my laptop bag to my chest and watching the rideshare app spin. Driver is 7 minutes away, then 9, then 11. Are you kidding me? I muttered. I'd pulled a 10-hour day cleaning up a last-minute deck for a client that Ethan should have prepared for a week ago. My head hurt, my eyes burned. I could feel the imprint of my office chair in my spine. And still, when Ethan had leaned against my cubicle earlier, flashed that easy, confident smile and said, "Alex, you're my lifesaver. Just get this across the finish line, and I'll owe you one." I'd done it. Like I always did. I'm Alex, by the way. 32, senior analyst at Blake and Rowe Capital. At least, that's what my business card says. In reality, I was more like a one-woman damage control unit for my boss, Ethan Blake, who liked to act like every crisis was a surprise, and every miracle was his idea. From the outside, my life probably looked pretty good. I had a solid salary, a beautiful apartment in the city, a wardrobe that finally didn't come exclusively from sale racks, and a job at a firm people bragged about on LinkedIn. My parents told their friends they were proud. My college group chat joked that I was the rich one, even though they had no idea how many hours I sold my soul for those paychecks. And then there was Ethan. He was the kind of man people built stories around. Tall, charismatic, effortlessly charming in that I-run-the-room way. He had the kind of smile that made clients lean in and the kind of memory that made you feel special when he remembered some small detail about you from months ago. When I first joined the firm 5 years ago, I thought working for him was a dream. He pulled me into important meetings, asked for my opinion in front of partners, complimented my models, and told people, "Alex sees around corners. She's the future of this place." Do you know what that does to 20-something who's killing herself to prove she belongs in a room full of Ivy League resumes and generational money? It hooks you. So yeah, from a distance, my life looked almost perfect. I had the promising career. I had the in with the boss everyone wanted to impress. And now, to complete the picture, the firm also had the perfect wedding coming up. Ethan S. His engagement to Harper had turned into an unofficial company event. Harper was, well, she was exactly what people expect when they hear the phrase, rich wedding. Blonde, impeccably styled, with the kind of elegance that came from never having to worry about overdraft fees. She worked on charity boards, went to galas, and could somehow make even basic black dresses look like they walked off a runway. Ethan loved talking about the wedding, not in a sentimental way, in a production value way. Venue was some estate outside the city with manicured lawns, and a driveway so long you could probably measure it in zip codes. The guest list was full of investors, politicians, tech founders, and people whose last names were on buildings. Half the firm was invited. "You're coming, right?" he'd asked me weeks ago, casually dropping the heavy cream envelope on my desk. "I need you there, Alex. I want my best people around me," I'd smiled, because that's what I do. "Of course," ID said. "Wouldn't miss it." What I didn't say was that I was already dreading watching the man who treated work like a battlefield play doting husband in front of champagne glasses and fairy lights. So there I was, that rainy evening, waiting for my ride outside the lobby. 7 minutes away. 9, 11. My phone buzzed with a new notification. Another message from Ethan in the team chat. "Great job today, Alex. Couldn't have done it without you." didn't add a smiley face, but I could feel the implied pat on the head. I sighed, my breath curling in the damp air, and looked to my right. That's when I noticed the tiny used bookstore I'd walked past 100 times and barely registered. It was wedged between a boutique fitness studio and a sleek coffee shop, its awning faded and its front window cluttered with crooked book stacks and yellowed signs. A handwritten note taped to the door said, "Yes, we're open. Come in and get lost." I don't know why that hit me. Maybe because I wanted to be lost in something that wasn't a spreadsheet for once. My ride time ticked up to 14 minutes. Of course, I muttered, screw it. I crossed the sidewalk and pushed the bookstore door open. A little bell chimed overhead, the sound soft and oddly comforting. The air inside smelled like paper and dust and ink, with a faint trace of old coffee. "Hey there," a man's voice called. The owner sat behind the counter, glasses perched on his nose, a crossword puzzle spread out in front of him. He glanced up briefly, gave me a nod, then went back to his clue, 7 letters, something about betrayal. I huffed out a tiny laugh at that. Fitting. The store was narrow, with tall shelves that leaned slightly like they were tired of standing perfectly straight. Books were stacked everywhere on shelves, on the floor, in little piles on chairs. A tiny lamp in the back cast warm light over a table overflowing with hardcovers. I walked slowly down the main aisle, fingers trailing over spines. Some titles jumped out, old business memoirs, biographies of CEOs who probably thought they'd made it to the top fairly. Others were novels with cracked spines, their covers soft from too many hands. For a few minutes, I didn't think about work. I didn't think about numbers. I didn't think about Ethan. I just breathed. It felt like the first real breath I'd taken all day. Near the back, I turned toward a crowded corner labeled business/economics. Who wants to be a billionaire? Someone had written that last part on a sticky note and slapped it under the sign. One thick, dark blue hardcover caught my eye. Gold lettering on the spine was almost completely rubbed off, but I could make out enough to see it was some old biography of a corporate titan, one of those "How I Built My Empire" stories rich guys love to recommend on panels. I pulled it out of the shelf. The book was heavier than it looked. The cover was worn, the edges soft from years of being handled. I turned it over, curious about the inside flap, wondering what kind of self-aggrandizing nonsense I was about to read. As I flipped it, something slid out from between the pages. It happened so fast it didn't register at first. There was just this soft, slick sound, and then a small rectangle fluttered down, hit the edge of the shelf, and landed face up on the floor at my feet. I frowned and crouched to pick it up. It was a photo, a glossy, high-quality, slightly faded 4x6 photo with a white border. The kind you get from a professional photographer, not some random phone print. First thing I saw was light. Fairy lights, to be exact, strung across a beautifully decorated outdoor space. White flowers everywhere. Crystal chandeliers hanging from some kind of tent ceiling. Round tables set with candles. It was like the inside of a wedding Pinterest, board threw up on a vineyard. Center frame, a bride and groom. She wore a fitted, elegant white gown with lace sleeves and a long veil. Her dark hair was styled in loose waves, pinned back on one side with something that sparkled. Her bouquet was white roses and greenery, held loosely in her left hand. Her right hand was in his. He wore a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, white shirt, black bow tie, one hand in his pocket, the other holding hers. He was turned slightly toward her, smiling. My first thought was, wow, that's a lot of money in one picture. Then my eyes focused on the groom's face, and my heart stuttered. I blinked. Once. Twice. No, I whispered. whispered under my breath. But the more I looked, the less room there was for denial. I knew that jawline, that smirk that always seemed half amused, half calculating. The way his dark hair fell, almost but not quite perfectly in place. It was Ethan, not younger, not different, not some distant cousin or maybe him, but maybe not. It was him, my boss, the man whose wedding to Harper we'd been hearing about nonstop for months, standing in a different wedding, with a different woman. Stared at the photo so long my knees started to complain about crouching. The bride was Harper. Harper was blonde, with a soft, polished look, and a love for pastel dresses and nude lipstick. This woman had deep brown hair, darker eyes, sharper cheekbones, a different energy, entirely more grounded, less polished, but in a way that made her look real. Okay, I thought, forcing myself to breathe. This could be a styled shoot, a mock wedding for a venue catalog, something weird. Then I flipped the photo. The back, neat handwriting looped across the glossy surface in black ink. To my forever love, E+L May 28, 2018, our beginning. The words blurred for a second because I just stopped blinking. I read them again and again. Forever love, E+L May 28, 2018. Hey, you doing okay back there? The owner called from the front. I jumped. Yeah, I said a little too quickly. Yeah, I'm good, just browsing. My brain was sprinting. May 2018. I joined Blake and Rowe in September 2019. I distinctly remembered Ethan saying at a team dinner last year that he and Harper had been together for about 6 years, give or take. Everyone had raised their glasses and talked about finding the one. But 2018 wasn't 6 years ago, and nowhere in any of Ethan's stories had there ever been a mention of someone whose name started with L. I turned the photo back over, looking more closely at the details. Behind the happy couple, the guests were clapping and smiling. Rows of chairs, filled with people in tuxedos and dresses that definitely didn't come off discount racks. You could just tell. Jewelry that didn't look like it came out of mall cases. Facial expressions that said this wasn't their first expensive event. One face in the second row grabbed me. An older man with silver hair, a slightly sagging jawline, and a posture that said he was used to being listened to. He was wearing a dark suit, a white pocket square, and an expression that looked half bored even in the middle of a celebration. I knew him. At least, I recognized him. He was one of our firm's limited partners, Davenport. I'd seen him at quarterly meetings, sitting at the end of the table, asking a few strategic questions, and then zoning out when anyone under a certain net worth started talking. What was he doing in the background of Ethan's mystery wedding? My skin prickled. I glanced toward the front of the store. The owner had gone back to his crossword, humming quietly to himself. No one else was inside. For a split second, I considered slipping the photo into my bag and walking out, just taking it. But that felt wrong. Instead, I slid the photo back inside the book, between the pages, like it had been when I found it. My fingers hesitated for a second, then left it near the top so I knew where it was. I walked up to the counter with the book. Find something good? Owner asked, tearing his gaze away from 7 down. I set the book down. I think so, I said. He scanned the back with an old barcode reader that beeped like it had a cigarette habit. $3, he said. $3. $3 for a book and a photograph that had no business existing in my world. $3 for a secret that had somehow fallen into my lap in the most random place possible. I handed over a 5, took the book and my change, and stepped back out into the damp air. The sky had finally committed to rain, a fine mist coming down that left tiny droplets on my hair. My phone buzzed. Your driver is arriving. I hugged the book to my chest and walked to the curb, the weight of it suddenly feeling a lot heavier than a second-hand hardcover should. In the car, I held it on my lap the whole ride home. I didn't open it. I didn't have to. I could see the photo in my mind as clearly as if it were still in my hands. Ethan, smiling that practiced smile. The unknown bride, looking at him like the future was theirs. The date on the back. The words, "Our beginning." My apartment was quiet when I walked in, just the hum of the fridge and the faint traffic noise from the street below. I kicked off my heels, left my bag by the couch, and went straight to the kitchen for a glass of red wine. My brain kept telling me to drop it. People have pasts. Rich people have messier pasts. It wasn't my business. Except I'd built my entire job on paying attention to details, on noticing when something didn't line up, on spotting the one number in a sea of thousands that didn't fit the pattern. And this didn't fit. I sat down on my couch, pulled the book out of my bag, and opened it slowly. The photo slid out just like before and fell onto my lap. I lifted it up, studied it again under the warm light of my living room lamp. The bride's dress had delicate lace, along the neckline, little tiny patterns that probably cost more than my rent. Her hand on Ethan's arm looked relaxed, like she trusted him completely. The more I stared at Ethan's face, though, the more it bothered me. It was a good picture. Anyone else would have seen a handsome groom on his big day. But I'd spent 5 years watching this man in meetings, negotiations, social events. I knew his tells, the micro expressions when he was playing a part versus when he actually meant something. And in this photo, his smile looked like performance. Maybe that sounds harsh. Maybe I was projecting. But his eyes looked like they were shining for the audience, not for the woman next to him. I flipped the photo over again, tracing the letters with my thumb. E plus L, who the hell was L? I grabbed my laptop and opened it on the coffee table, the screen lighting up my living room. I pulled my legs up under me, took a sip of wine, and told myself I was going to do just a quick search, just enough to satisfy my curiosity so I could sleep. Right. I typed his full name into the search bar, Ethan Blake Wedding. Dozens of results popped up, articles quoting him about market trends, photos of him and Harper at charity events, a glossy feature in some business magazine about power couples to watch. I clicked the article. There they were, Ethan and Harper, standing on a red carpet, her hand on his chest. The caption said they'd been together for years, though it didn't specify how many. The piece called them inseparable since early in his rise to prominence, which could mean anything from 3 years to a decade. I scrolled, scanning for dates. Social media posts. Engagement announcements. Harper's Instagram was public enough to show the polished surface. Pictures of beach vacations, gala gowns, brunches with friends, carefully curated shots of sunsets and coffee cups. Ethan appeared often, always in nice clothes, always smiling, always looking like the world was exactly as it should be. I scrolled back in time, watching their lives rewind. Last month, last year, the year before. Eventually, the photos thinned out and turned into older posts in different styles and filters. The earliest picture of Ethan on her feed was from late 2019. "Can't believe I get to do life with this one," she'd captioned it. Comments full of heart emojis. People saying, "Finally, and you two are perfect." Nothing before that. I flipped to wedding hashtags tied to their names. The actual engagement announcement was from early 2022. The wedding hadn't happened yet. It was a few months away. That part I already knew. Nowhere in any of those glossy, carefully lit images was there a hint of another bride, another wedding, another forever love. I leaned back against my couch cushions, stared at the ceiling, and exhaled slowly. "Drop it," I told myself quietly. "Just drop it." But that wasn't me. If a number didn't add up in a model, I didn't just round it and move on. I drilled down until I found why it was off by 1 decimal point. And this wasn't a decimal point. This was an entire wedding that didn't exist. I picked up the photo again, squinted at the background. That familiar face Davenport. I zoomed in with my phone camera, taking a close-up shot of him and enlarging it. His expression was mid-clap, slightly softer than the bored look I knew from boardrooms, but still unmistakably him. "Okay," I muttered. "You were there." Why? Wealthy people moved in small circles. Investors went to the same fundraisers. Families intermarried. That part wasn't shocking. But if this was just some random client's wedding, why was the groom my boss? I stared a little longer, then opened a new tab and typed, "Mark's Family Foundation logo." I don't even know what made me think of that. Maybe it was some instinct, some half-remembered image from presentation decks or donor lists. A logo popped up, a stylized lion mid-stride. I'd seen it 100 times in footers of reports and on the corner of slides. Mark's Family Foundation was one of our big legacy clients, old money, philanthropy-focused, with a special emphasis on education and small business grants. We managed a major portion of their portfolio. I glanced back at the photo, at the tiny banner visible in the far background on the edge of the reception tent. Was that? I zoomed in as far as my phone would let me. The pixels blurred, but I could just make out something that looked like that same lion shape. I sat there still, feeling the pieces shift in my head like a puzzle I hadn't known existed. There was a story here, a missing chapter in the carefully curated Ethan Blake narrative. Most people would have chalked it up to rich guy drama and let it go. But I'd spent years building my career on one core principle: numbers don't lie, only people do. And something about this picture felt like a lie. I didn't know it yet, but finding that photo wasn't just some weird coincidence. It was the first crack in the perfect painting I'd been staring at for years. The tiny fracture that, once I started pressing on it, would split open and show me what was really underneath. At that point, though, I was just a tired analyst on a couch, holding a stranger's wedding photo of my boss, and wondering if I was reading too much into a piece of glossy paper. So I did what I always do with uncomfortable questions in my personal life. I put the photo back in the book, closed it, and set it on my coffee table. I'll deal with it tomorrow, I told myself. Spoiler, tomorrow didn't let me forget. Because the next morning, when I walked into the office and saw Ethan standing there, laughing with a partner, I didn't just see my charming, ambitious boss anymore. I saw a groom in a forgotten wedding, with a bride who didn't exist in his current story. And once you see someone differently, you can't unsee it. That was the moment, though I didn't fully understand it yet, when my almost perfect career started to crack. And a simple, random stop in a used bookstore turned into the first step toward the kind of revenge and karma story I never imagined I'd be at the center of. The next morning, the office looked exactly the same, but it didn't feel the same to me. Blake and Rose lobby was all glass and steel and tasteful art that probably cost more than my student loans. Receptionists smiled, the coffee machine hissed, traders argued in low voices near the elevator bay. It was all normal, except my stomach had that low, twisting feeling you get when you know something everyone else doesn't. I badged in, rode the elevator up with 2 junior analysts arguing about some startup's burn rate, and tried to act like I hadn't spent half the night staring at a photo of my boss's secret wedding. When the elevator doors opened onto our floor, I saw him. Ethan was standing near the conference room, one hand in his pocket, talking to one of the partners. He was laughing at something, head tilted back just enough to show off that easy, relaxed confidence. His suit was navy, his tie was some obnoxiously subtle designer pattern, and his hair was doing that perfectly imperfect thing. To everyone else, he was just Ethan. To me, he was suddenly layered. I saw him at that unknown wedding in my mind. Different suit, different woman, same practiced smile. I saw the way his eyes looked in that picture. And for the first time in 5 years, I looked at him and thought, what else don't I know about you? Morning, Alex. His voice snapped me out of it. I hadn't even noticed him walking over. Morning, I said, forcing my face into something between polite and neutral. Got a sec? He gestured with his chin toward his office. Need you before the 9:30. Sure. I followed him down the hall, past rows of glass-partitioned offices and cubicles, into his corner space with the floor-to-ceiling windows and view of the city. The door swung shut with that soft, expensive click I always noticed for some reason. Sit, he said, dropping his leather portfolio on the desk and loosening his tie. I sank into the chair opposite him, crossing my legs, laptop balanced on my lap. My heart was beating a little faster than usual, and I hated that I noticed. So, he said, leaning back, Dixon meeting this afternoon. You got the updated projections done, yeah? Yeah, I said. I sent the deck last night and printed copies for the 2 p.m. That's why you're my favorite, he said, giving me that grin. Normally, that line would hit me with a mix of annoyance and secret satisfaction. Today, it just felt hollow. He didn't notice. I want to throw in a slide about the Marks Foundation portfolio, he went on, tapping the desk with a pen. Just a quick mention of our impact work, Optics. These guys love to feel like they're not just chasing returns. Marks Foundation. The words landed differently now that I'd spent half the night spiraling. Sure, I said carefully. Any specific metrics you want highlighted, he shrugged. Something about education, entrepreneurship, uplifting communities, you know the drill. Just make us look good without promising anything stupid. Got it. He studied me for a second longer than usual. You good? You look tired. I almost laughed. I'm fine, I said, just didn't sleep great. Hey, he said, his tone softening, don't burn out on me. We've got big moves coming this year. I need you sharp. There it was again. I need you. You're my right hand. All those little hooks. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. Actually, I've been thinking about getting you more involved with Marks. Larger role on that fund. It's a little messy, performance-wise, and I could use someone who actually understands nuance. My pulse skipped. Marks. The same foundation whose logo I thought I saw in that wedding photo. The same foundation tied to old money, legacy, and probably some giant inheritance. Yeah, I said lightly. Yeah, he said. It's not as sexy as some of the growth stuff, but it's important. And it plays really well with clients who care about impact. Plus, he smirked, it's a good look for you. You do good work there, partners will notice. Translation, keep doing my dirty, complicated tasks for me, and maybe, eventually, I'll approve the promotion I've been dangling for 2 years. Just tell me what you need, I said. His eyes crinkled. That's what I like about you, Alex. Always a team player. When I left his office, I walked straight back to my desk, opened a new spreadsheet, and pretended to work on the Dixon file. My fingers hovered over the keys, frozen. Marks, I whispered under my breath. I pulled up the internal folder for the Marks Family Foundation portfolio. The files were neatly organized, performance reports, allocation breakdowns, compliance notes. Stuff I'd seen, glanced at, worked around before, but never really dug into. Now, the names and numbers felt radioactive. I clicked on the main performance summary. At a high level, it looked fine. Not incredible, not terrible, just fine. Mix of equities, fixed income, alternative investments. some funds performing above benchmark, some below. A perfectly normal, slightly conservative institutional portfolio. But I wasn't looking at the big picture anymore. I was looking for cracks. I opened the subfolder for one of their key focus areas, education and entrepreneurship fund. This was the part of the portfolio specifically earmarked for programs that supported students and small business owners, exactly the kind of stuff that got name dropped in speeches and gala brochures. The returns on that segment were underwhelming, lower than the rest, not catastrophic, but lagging. The notes kept using phrases like strategic repositioning and market headwinds. If I hadn't been suspicious, I might have accepted that. But my brain was stuck on a different question. Why was Ethan so personally involved in a headache fund he publicly downplayed? I pulled up the detailed transaction logs. Rows and rows of dates, amounts, descriptions, account numbers, approvals. To anyone else, it probably looked like noise. To me, it was a language I knew how to read. I scanned for patterns. At first, nothing obvious jumped out. There were big, legit transfers, capital calls, rebalancing moves, scheduled disbursements to known programs. But buried between them here and there were small, almost insignificant seeming entries, administrative fees, consulting charges, strategic advisory bills from entities I didn't immediately recognize. Each one was tiny in the grand scheme of things. $5,000 here, $12,000 there, a couple hundred in transaction costs. The kind of thing you could wave off as noise, but they repeated. Over months, over years, all flowing into the same handful of shells. I copied the entity names into a separate tab. 2 of them were LLCs with generic, forgettable names: Northbridge Services, Liongate Advisory. Another was some consulting group with a grandiose, almost parody-sounding title. I'd never heard Ethan mention them. They weren't in any pitch decks I'd put together. I pulled up our internal vendor database and searched. Liongate Advisory had a sparse profile, registered address in a nondescript office building, minimal info, vague description, approving officer for their setup. E. Blake. My jaw clenched. Okay, I thought, could still be legit. Ethan was a senior partner, of course his name would show up. But the timing was interesting. Liongate's contract started 3 months after the date on that wedding photo. 3 months after May 2018. I added that to my growing mental whiteboard. Ethan marries mystery bride, L, connected to old money foundation. Marriage somehow disappears from public view. Months later, foundation portfolio restructures, and a new advisory firm he approved starts quietly collecting fees. I took a deep breath and sat back. Alex, you good? I looked up. One of the other analysts, Nora, had paused by my desk with a coffee in hand. Yeah, I said quickly. Just deep in Mark's land. She grimaced. Better you than me. That account gives me hives, and Ethan's obsessed with it, like I don't get why we care that much when the performance is mid at best. Yeah, I said slowly. Weird, right? She shrugged. Whatever. He's the genius, remember? She rolled her eyes playfully and kept walking. I watched her go and felt a wave of something sharp wash over me. I used to believe that he was just the genius, that any unease I felt was just me not seeing the whole picture yet. Now, I wondered if the whole picture was something nobody was supposed to see. At lunch, I didn't go out with the team like usual. Instead, I grabbed a sad salad from the downstairs cafe and ate it at my desk, headphones in, screen full of numbers. I traced transaction trails. Every time a tiny fee showed up, I followed where it went. The pattern was subtle. That pissed me off in a weird way. It meant he'd put thought into hiding it. He wasn't stupid. He knew how to bury things. over and over. The money flowed from the foundation's education fund into these little-nothing entities, then out again to other funds, other firms, some of it looping back into vehicles we managed, but with slightly different fee structures. Some of it disappeared into places I'd need more access to fully decode. By the time I looked up, my salad was half eaten and my eyes burned. I checked the time. I had 10 minutes before the 2 p.m. Dixon meeting. I closed the spreadsheet, forced myself to switch mental tracks, and grabbed the printed deck. Ethan liked when I came into those meetings prepared to carry half the conversation. It made him look good. In the conference room, I watched him work. He was smooth, confident, knew exactly when to lean forward, when to nod, when to crack a joke. He tossed the occasional "Alex, why don't you walk them through that?" my way, and I hit my marks. But behind it all, a part of my brain kept saying, how much of what you do is real, and how much is just sleight of hand? After the meeting, back in my corner, my messenger pinged. "Ethan, nice job in there. Dixon loved you. Grab a drink later with the team." I started to type "sure," then stopped. For once, I didn't want to sit in a bar listening to him talk about his future, his wedding, his plans. I didn't want to watch my colleagues worship him me. Thanks. Need to head home after I finish this Mark's analysis. Rain check. The 3 dots appeared. "Ethan, of course you're working. Fine, but don't overdo it. We're not paying you to die at your desk." Kidding, mostly. I fake smiled at my screen, then closed the chat and dove back into Mark's. That night at home, I went further. I pulled public records on the Mark's Foundation. Old annual reports, press releases about grant programs, mentions of strategic partners. Their mission statements were all about education, arts, health, and creating long-term opportunity for underserved communities. Noble, polished, exactly the kind of thing that made rich people feel good about themselves. I wasn't cynical about charity. Not really. But I'd seen enough to know that anywhere there's a lot of money and not enough eyes, someone will eventually get greedy. The more I cross-referenced the Foundation's public commitments with our internal allocation logs, the more little discrepancies I found. A scholarship program that was supposed to expand in 2021 didn't. A small business incubator that had been announced with fanfare just kind of vanished. No follow-up press releases. No impact reports. Nothing. Where did the money for those go? In some cases, it looked like the funds were reallocated due to market conditions or strategic refocusing. Translated, we moved the money somewhere else and hoped no one cared enough to ask. I should probably say this. At that point, I still wasn't 100% sure Ethan was doing anything illegal. It could have just been aggressive fee structures, gray area allocation games, and maybe some morally bankrupt decisions that technically stayed within contract language. But I knew one thing. If I found a thread and pulled it, something ugly was going to come loose. And a tiny, dangerous part of me wanted that, because I was tired. Tired of working myself numb while men like Ethan got richer. Tired of watching him charm his way out of accountability. Tired of feeling like my whole identity was wrapped up in making him look good. So when my phone buzzed with a calendar reminder, wedding RSVP due in 2 weeks, I almost laughed. Here I was, planning how deep to go into my boss's secrets, while the world around him was gearing up to celebrate his happily ever after. I set the phone down, reached for the photo on the table, and held it up next to my laptop screen. On one side, Ethan and his new fiancée, Harper, in a glossy magazine, all polished edges and power vibes. On the other, Ethan and the mystery bride, Lydia, in a candid-looking wedding shot tucked inside an old book. 2 lives, 2 stories, 1 man. and somewhere in the middle of those, a foundation's money bleeding out in drips and drops. That was the night I stopped telling myself this was just curiosity. I created a new folder on my personal drive. I named it something boring and harmless, like Old Taxes or Archive 2019. Inside it, I saved copies of the transaction logs I'd pulled, screenshots of vendor contracts, notes on weird reallocation memos. I didn't take everything. I wasn't dumb. That would have set off alerts. I took just enough to reconstruct the pattern if I had to. I also took one more look at the handwriting on the photo. To my forever love, E+L our beginning. I didn't know where that woman was now. I didn't know what had happened between them. But I had a pretty strong suspicion that whatever had gone down, Ethan had walked away just fine. And if there was one thing I was starting to realize about men like him, it was this: they don't really believe consequences apply to them. That belief, that arrogance, it was the crack I was going to pry open. I just didn't realize yet how many people had already been hurt by what he'd buried. But I was about to find out. Finding the patterns in the numbers was one thing. Seeing the people those patterns hurt was something else entirely. First, it was just another late night with too much blue light and not enough sleep. I was sitting at my dining table, laptop open, that wedding photo of Ethan and Lydia propped up against my water glass like some twisted paperweight. The spreadsheet ID built was getting longer, multiple tabs, color coding, little notes to myself in the margin cells. I'd mapped out 3 years worth of tiny siphons from the Marks Education and Entrepreneurship Fund into a web of dull-sounding entities. Individually, none of them looked like a crime. Together, they painted a picture that made my stomach knot. The total diverted amount at the bottom of my summary tab made me exhale through my teeth. Millions, not billions, not headline-level fraud, but millions. Enough to change thousands of lives if spent the way donors thought it was being spent. I sat back, rubbed my eyes, and scrolled through the list of defunded or restructured programs tied to the foundation. Publicly, their website still looked generous and busy. But if you dug into archived pages, press releases, and local news clips, you started to see the gaps. There was a scholarship program at a community college system that had been announced with a lot of fanfare in 2020. Big promises, full ride scholarships for first-generation students in STEM, mentorship, small stipend for living expenses. The foundation's site now had a small, polite note saying the program had been scaled down due to changing strategic priorities. That phrase always sounds clean until you realize it translates to "we pulled money" and hoped you'd quietly adapt or disappear. I dug deeper. Local news archive, small city paper, an article from last year about students scrambling to cover tuition because a private foundation's promised scholarships had been paused indefinitely. Quotes were brutal: kids talking about maybe dropping out, working extra shifts, families panicking. My cursor hovered over a particular line where one student said, "They told us the money was guaranteed." I planned my whole semester around it. I thought about the number at the bottom of my spreadsheet. If even a fraction of what Ethan had quietly peeled off the fund had gone where it was supposed to, that student would have been fine. I closed my eyes for a second. Look, I work in finance. I'm not naive. I know money gets moved around. I know administrative fees and consulting costs and liquidity needs can become catch-all phrases for whatever leadership wants to do. But this felt different. This wasn't a struggling nonprofit trying to keep the lights on and moving restricted funds around in desperation. This was a wealthy family foundation with an investment firm behind it. and a man who had personally benefited from marrying into that family suddenly finding clever little ways to drain their legacy projects. It wasn't just bad optics. It was theft dressed up as strategy. I clicked to another tab I'd started building. Real-world impact. Yeah, I know. I'm a nerd. But I needed to remind myself that this wasn't just lines on a screen. I'd pulled data on a small business incubator in a majority-minority neighborhood that had quietly shut its doors after a promised grant never came. A rural tech education program that made a splashy launch announcement, then just never had a year two. A microloan initiative for women-owned businesses that mysteriously halved its capacity after funding adjustments. Most of these places didn't make national news. They were buried in local coverage, Facebook posts from frustrated organizers, comment threads from people asking, "Hey, whatever happened to that program?" I clicked one of the links. I'd bookmarked an article about a community-based incubator that had folded. The director talked about how they'd been counting on a foundation grant that got delayed, then reduced, then repurposed. I scrolled far enough to see photos of the people who'd lost that support, women holding their kids, men in stained work shirts, younger people with startup prototypes made from cardboard and hope. They weren't the kind of people who went to Ethan's fancy parties or sat in our conference rooms. They were the kind of people whose names never showed up in our models, just numbers in impact decks. I leaned my head back against the chair, staring at the ceiling. "You're not supposed to care this much," I told myself. "You're just the analyst." But that was the problem. I did care. The more I saw, the harder it was to pretend this was just some victimless accounting trick. At work, the next week blurred into a mix of normal tasks and covert digging. During the day, I built models, sat in meetings, and pretended nothing was different. Ethan was in full pre-wedding peacock mode, talking about catering tastings, joking about the bachelor party, dropping little hints about big things coming with key clients after he tied the knot. At night, I turned into someone else, someone who cross-referenced grant commitments with capital movements, someone who annotated internal emails with notice language here. And why this timing? One afternoon, I got my first real, solid crack in the wall. It was in a smaller conference room, finishing some tweaks on a portfolio report, when Jenna, our junior legal counsel friend, poked her head in. "You hiding?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Always," I said. "What's up?" She stepped in and closed the door behind her, which was my first clue this wasn't casual. "You got a minute?" "Yeah." She dropped into the chair opposite me and sighed. "Okay, you didn't hear this from me, and if you repeat it, I'll deny it, but compliance is twitchy right now." It got my attention. "Twitchy how?" She drummed her fingers on the table. "There's chatter. Some of the foundation clients are asking more detailed questions. One in particular. Marks?" I asked before I could stop myself. Her eyes narrowed. "You're too good at this." "Yeah, marks." My heart picked up speed. "Why? I thought they were one of our proud legacy relationships." "Oh, they are," she said dryly. "Which is why they're used to being kept happy." But apparently, some of their internal folks started raising eyebrows about performance in certain segments versus what was promised to their board. Someone mentioned the word audit on a call. A real one, not just our internal dog and pony show. "An audit," I repeated. "Yeah," she leaned in. "And guess which fund they're looking at first?" I didn't have to guess. "The Education and Entrepreneurship Fund," I said. "Bingo," I swallowed. "Does Ethan know?" "Not yet, officially," she said. "Partners are trying to manage the narrative, but he's not stupid. He'll feel it in the air soon." I thought of his signature on the Lion Gate setup forms, of the dates, of Lydia's name on the back of that photo, tied to this exact foundation. Jenna, I said slowly, can I ask you something, hypothetically? She snorted. I love how people think adding hypothetically makes it not my job anymore. Go on. Say a senior partner has some kind of personal history with a family foundation client, I said, picking my words carefully. Like, say there was a past relationship, maybe even a marriage, and it ended with a settlement that included restrictions on access to inheritance or funds. If that same partner later manages that family's foundation capital and quietly directs fees to entities he controls, what does that look like legally? Her expression went from amused to razor sharp in half a second. Wow, she said. You don't do small hypotheticals, huh? I'm just curious, I said. She studied me for a long moment. You talking about anyone in particular? I held her gaze, but kept my face neutral. If I was, I wouldn't say it. Not yet. She tapped a pen against the table, thinking. Okay, she said finally. Hypothetically, that's a nightmare. Potential breach of fiduciary duty, conflict of interest, maybe even violation of a marital settlement, depending on how it was written. If he signed something saying he wouldn't pursue the inheritance, and then did an end run around that by siphoning from restricted foundation funds, it's bad. Like multiple lawyers arguing in a room for days, bad. Even if the amounts are small individually, especially if they add up, she said. Courts and regulators don't love patterns of misappropriation, and family offices hate feeling played. Might settle quietly for reputational reasons, but trust me, they'd be out for blood behind closed doors. I nodded slowly, my chest tight. She watched me. Why do I get the feeling you already have more than a hypothetical? I hesitated. Then I said, let's just say I'm noticing some patterns. And given how much my name is on the work product, I'd like to know whether I'm in the blast radius if something blows up. Her face softened a little. You worried about your own exposure. Should I be? She sighed. Depends. If you're signing off on obviously shady stuff, yeah, you could get dragged into the mud. If you've got receipts showing you raised concerns and were overruled, you're probably safer. But this firm, it's not famous for throwing powerful men under the bus first. I thought of Ethan, of how everyone bent around him. What would you do? I asked. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling for a second. If I had what you seem to have, she said slowly, I'd document everything. And I mean everything. I'd make sure copies of key docs existed somewhere outside our servers. And if I really believed a client was being screwed by one of our own, I might find a way to make sure they saw it before an internal spin machine could bury it. You'd go around the firm. In this hypothetical, she said, giving me a pointed look. I didn't say that. But I will say this. People like Ethan are used to everyone protecting them. That's how they get this far. The only thing that ever stops them is someone willing to not play along. She pushed her chair back, stood, and picked up her folder. Just be careful, Alex, she said, heading for the door. This place doesn't reward people who rock the boat, even when the boat needs rocking. When she left, the quiet swallowed me. I stared at the blank wall for a long moment, then opened my laptop and pulled up my old taxes folder. The evidence I'd gathered so far suddenly felt heavier. Up until then, I'd been able to tell myself I was just looking, just understanding, just making sure I knew what kind of man I worked for. Now I knew that what I had could actually hurt him, not just annoy him, not just embarrass him, really hurt him. And not gonna lie, that scared me. Because as much as I was starting to resent him, my name and career were tied to his. If he went down, there was a good chance he'd try to drag anyone within arm's reach with him. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the people behind those defunded initiatives. I started searching for them more deliberately. I found a community college student who'd posted on a forum about losing her scholarship halfway through her program because the foundation funding fell through. She talked about picking up 2 part-time jobs, almost dropping out, crying in her car in between shifts. I found a small business owner on a local news clip, standing in front of an empty storefront, saying they'd been counting on that grant, and now had no idea what to do. I found a social media post from a teacher talking about telling her students the tech lab they'd been promised wasn't happening after all. These weren't anonymous numbers. They had faces, voices, and the thing that burned me the most, they blamed the foundation. Not Ethan, not the firm, not the rich guy who'd figured out how to turn a philanthropy vehicle into a side hustle. He was still out there, charming rooms and bragging about impact while they were picking up the pieces. Something in me snapped a little. I didn't throw my laptop. I didn't scream. It was quieter than that. It was this cold, steady resolve settling in my chest. I was done pretending to be neutral. I'd spent years being loyal, being smart, being useful. Cleaned up his messes, made his deals look cleaner, helped him spin questionable calls into stories clients could swallow. None of that changed who he really was. He was the kind of man who could look a donor in the eye and talk about changing lives, while he used their trust as a slush fund to replace the inheritance he'd lost in a broken marriage. I thought of Lydia again. E plus L are beginning. What had he promised her? What had he taken? How had he walked away? I didn't have those answers yet. But I knew this much. Whatever had gone down, it hadn't taught him any humility. If anything, it had probably made him more careful, more subtle. And now, here he was, about to marry into another rich family, standing on a pile of borrowed legitimacy and stolen opportunities, while everyone toasted him for being brilliant. No, I couldn't stop what he'd already done, but I sure as hell wasn't going to let him keep going unchecked. Next day at work, he popped by my desk like nothing in the world was wrong. "Hey, superstar," he said, leaning on the partition. "Got a minute?" "Sure," I said, my voice even. "We're doing a pre-wedding thing this Friday," he said. "Drinks at the club, Harper's friends, some clients, couple partners. You should come. I want you in the room with some of these people. Good networking for you." Of course he did, always dangling access. "Thanks," I said. "I'll think about it." He frowned slightly. "You okay? You've been, I don't know, quiet." "I'm fine," I said, just focused. He smiled. "That's my Alex." When he walked away, I watched him go and thought, "You have no idea, do you? No idea that the person you're grooming to be your right hand is slowly collecting the rope you're going to hang yourself with." That afternoon, instead of just documenting, I crossed a line in my head. I opened a fresh document and titled it Summary for External Review. Not personal notes. Not for my lawyer someday. Summary. For someone outside. I didn't know exactly who yet. Mark's internal counsel, an auditor, maybe even a regulator if it came to that. But I knew this. I wasn't going to sit on this forever and hope someone else magically stumbled across the same threads. If anyone was going to pull the pin on this grenade, it was probably going to be me. And yeah, that was terrifying. But compared to watching him stand at an altar, say vows about honor and partnership for the second time, while still stealing from the people he claimed to help, the fear felt smaller than the anger. That was the night I stopped just gathering information and started planning. By then, my hypothetical questions with Jenna weren't hypothetical anymore in my head. I had a spreadsheet that mapped out 3 years of quiet siphoning from the Mark's education and entrepreneurship fund into shell entities Ethan had approved. I had screenshots of internal emails where he brushed off compliance pings. I had a running list of projects that lost funding right after money got reallocated. What I didn't have yet was a way to make sure the right people saw all of it before the firm spun it into something neat and harmless. The moment that changed came in the form of a name on a calendar invite. We were prepping for a quarterly impact review with the Marx Foundation, one of those performative calls where our side presented charts about returns and social value, and their side pretended they trusted us. I'd built half the deck, of course. I was scrolling through the attendee list when I saw it. Laura Marx, Director, Internal Audit and Compliance, Marx Family Foundation. I'd never seen her on a call before. Usually we dealt with their investment staff or external consultants. Internal audit showing up, that was new and very interesting. On the day of the call, Ethan was wired in from his office, all charm and small talk. I sat in the conference room with the partners, my laptop open, ready to walk through some slides. When Laura's video came on, I felt weirdly nervous. She looked to be in her 40s, dark hair pulled back, minimal makeup, a plain blazer. No fuss. Behind her, instead of some fancy office art, there were shelves of binders and a whiteboard full of scribbles. She didn't waste time. "Thanks for taking the time," she said after the intros. "We've been going through our internal materials, and we just want to make sure we fully understand the movements in the education and entrepreneurship segments, especially around administrative and advisory costs." Administrative and advisory. If my heart rate had a chart, it would have spiked right there. Ethan didn't flinch. "Of course," he said smoothly. "We've been proactively optimizing that area to navigate market challenges. Alex can walk you through some of the specifics. She's been leading the analysis." He handed me the mic like I was just another bullet point in his story. I went through the prepared slides, the clean ones, the ones that told a perfectly reasonable story about reallocations and fee structures. Laura listened, occasionally jotting notes. When I finished, she asked a few surprisingly pointed questions about certain vendors and why we'd chosen them. Ethan answered with practiced patience, saying things like our diligence process and long-term partnerships. When the call ended, he shut his laptop and turned to me. "Nice recovery on that third question," he said. "She's feisty. Internal audit types always are," I shrugged. "She seems thorough." He smirked. "Thorough is fine, as long as she doesn't get creative." Line bothered me more than it probably should have. A few hours later, I got a surprise. An email sent to my work address, but from a personal-looking domain. "Hi, Alex. I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly. I'm Laura Marx. We spoke briefly on the call earlier. I have a few follow-up questions and would appreciate your perspective outside formal presentation mode. Are you available for a quick coffee later this week? Off the record. Best, Laura." My first instinct was panic. My second was relief. I stared at the screen, then typed back, "Hi, Laura. Nice to meet you properly. I can make time for coffee Thursday after work. There's a cafe on 32nd and Pine that's usually quiet. Does 6 p.m. work best, Alex?" She replied within minutes. "Perfect. See you then." I spent the next 2 days going back and forth between tell her everything and hire a lawyer first and keep your mouth shut. In the end, I did what I always do, prepared. I printed a slim, sanitized version of my analysis, just enough to show patterns, without exposing how deep I'd gone into internal systems. I put it in a plain folder. I backed up the full version to an encrypted drive at home. I wrote out a timeline in my notebook: Ethan and Lydia's wedding date, the marital settlement I suspected existed, the start of the Liongate contract, the first questionable transfers. By Thursday, my nerves had settled into a kind of cold focus. Cafe was one of those places with exposed brick walls and hanging plants, the kind where people worked on laptops for hours over a single latte. At 6 p.m., It was half full. I got there early, chose a table in the back, and ordered an iced coffee I barely tasted. Laura walked in right on time. Up close, she looked exactly like she did on camera, sharp eyes, no-nonsense demeanor. She scanned the room, spotted me, and came over. "Alex." "Yeah," I said, standing. "Nice to meet you." We shook hands and sat. She ordered tea, then got straight to it. "I appreciate you meeting me," she said. "I know it can be delicate, talking about clients and numbers off the clock." "Sure," I said carefully. "You said you had questions." She studied me for a moment, and I had the unsettling feeling she could see right through my neutral professional mask. "I do," she said. "But first, I want to be clear about something. I'm not here to trap you or make you pick a side prematurely. I'm here because our foundation has a responsibility to our donors, to the communities we serve, and to my family's name, to understand exactly how our funds are being used. If something's wrong, I'd rather hear it from someone who actually understands the numbers than from a PR-optimized memo later." Her family's name, Marks. I swallowed. "I get that." She leaned in slightly. "Off the record, Alex, do you believe everything is as straightforward as your boss presented on that call?" Such a simple question. For a few seconds, I just stared at my hands. Then I heard myself say quietly, "No." She didn't look surprised. If anything, she looked sad. "I didn't think so," she said. "I've been going through our internal files, old agreements, settlement documents. There are inconsistencies." "And then your voice on that call," "My voice," I repeated. "You answered correctly," she said. "But I've been doing this long enough to hear when someone is choosing their words carefully. You sounded like someone who had more context than you could share in that setting." She wasn't wrong. I took a breath. This was either the dumbest or the bravest thing I was about to do. Maybe both. "I've been noticing patterns," I said. "On my own time, off the clock." She nodded slowly. "Go on." I pulled the folder from my bag and slid it across the table. "This is a high-level summary," I said. "Transaction patterns in the Education and Entrepreneurship Fund. Admin and advisory fees, specifically. I didn't bring everything, but it should be enough to show why I'm concerned." She opened it and started reading. It was painful watching her eyes move over the pages, seeing the exact moments where her expression tightened. "The same vendor entities," she murmured, "repeating charges, always just under thresholds that would trigger deeper review. Approved by," her jaw clenched. "Ethan," I finished for her. She looked up at me. "How long have you been tracking this?" "Few weeks seriously," I said, "but the patterns go back years." "And why did you start?" I hesitated, then decided there was no point half-lying now. "I found something," I said, "by accident, a photo." I told her about the used bookstore, the old business biography, the wedding photograph falling out, Ethan in a tux, holding hands with a bride who was Harper, the date, the handwritten message, E+L, our beginning. When I said Lydia, something flickered across Laura's face. "And," she said quietly. The air around us shifted. "She hasn't used the Blake name in a long time," Laura added. "My family doesn't talk about that chapter, but the settlement documents are in our internal archives. I've read them. My grandfather insisted on very clear terms when that marriage ended." "Terms?" I asked. She nodded. "Ethan received a generous payout to walk away and never assert any claim over family assets again. That included the foundation. The language is explicit, is to have no direct or indirect involvement in decisions that could benefit him financially from our charitable entities." I let that sink in. "And yet," I said, tapping the folder, "he's been structuring advisory deals and fee flows that ultimately benefit entities he controls. Hidden under layers, but traceable." She exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding her breath for years. "I suspected," she said. "I didn't have the proof. I knew our performance in that segment didn't match the story we were being told. I knew certain programs kept getting reprioritized, while advisory costs crept up. But we're not in your systems. We only see what your firm wants to show us. Most people wouldn't notice, I said. He's good at making it look like noise. She looked me dead in the eye. Why are you showing this to me, Alex? You know what this could mean for your job. I thought about that for a second. I said, because I'm tired of propping up men who treat other people's lives like rounding errors. Because this money was supposed to go to kids and small businesses, not backfill your ex-uncle's bruised ego and lost inheritance. And because if I sit on this, I'm not just complicit, I'm exactly the kind of person he thinks I am, loyal enough to stay quiet while he takes what he wants. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then Laura nodded once sharply. Okay, she said. Here's what we're going to do. The next 15 minutes were some of the clearest, coldest planning I've ever been part of. She laid out the foundation side. She would open a formal internal investigation, leveraging her audit authority, using my summary as a roadmap, but not as the only source. She would pull every agreement, every invoice, every email between the foundation and our firm, focusing on anything Ethan signed or pushed. She would brief her board's legal counsel in a closed session, tying this to the prior marital settlement and its clauses about disqualified persons and self-dealing. Once we confirm this pattern independently, she said, we'll have both a contractual and ethical basis to act. And what does act look like? I asked. Minimum, she said. Immediate termination of his authority over our funds, repayment of misused amounts, and internal reforms. Maximum. Full-blown legal action, possible referrals to regulators, and a very public separation from your firm if they try to shield him. And the timing. She glanced at the folder, then back at me. I know about the wedding, she said. Of course she did. It had practically become a city event in his circles. Publicly humiliating someone for private fraud can backfire if we're sloppy, she continued. But there's value in choosing a moment when all of his allies, backers, and enablers are in one place, watching. It makes it harder for people to pretend they didn't know afterward. You want to do it there, I said slowly. At the wedding. I want to serve notice and strip him of authority when he's least able to spin it, she said. And yes, that may mean the reception becomes memorable. I thought about Ethan's face when he'd bragged about the guest list, the photographers, the press. Be legal, I asked. It'll be contained, she said. We're not going to live stream his downfall, but we're going to confront him in front of the people who need to see exactly who they're aligning themselves with. And me, I asked. What happens to me in all this? She didn't sugarcoat it. Your firm may treat you as a traitor. He will almost certainly blame you if he figures out you were involved. There could be repercussions. Retaliation, subtle or not. I can't promise you a clean exit. I swallowed hard. But, she added, I can promise this. We will not throw you under the bus. If this escalates, you'll have the option to be represented as a cooperating witness. And if you ever need a reference for your integrity, you'll have one from the Mark side. I don't say that lightly. That last part mattered more than I wanted to admit. I nodded. What do you need from me now? For the moment, she said. Keep doing your job. Stay close enough to see if he accelerates anything. Large transfers, new vendors, anything that smells like he's getting wind of scrutiny. Document anything that shows he knew or should have known this was wrong. And don't, under any circumstances, confront him directly yet. Got it, I said. We set up a secure way to communicate an encrypted email, a burner messaging app for brief, vague updates. Then she closed the folder, slid it back to me, and said, Don't keep this here. Take it home. Assume anything at your office can be pulled if they smell smoke. When I walked out of that cafe, the city looked the same, cars passing, people scrolling on their phones, buses hissing at intersections. But everything had shifted for me. Up until then, it had been me versus my own conscience. Now, it was me and a pissed-off heiress with legal authority and a very personal stake. Ethan liked to think he played chess, while everyone else played checkers. For once, he wasn't the only one moving pieces. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, I played my part. At work, I was the same old Alex. I prepped reports. I sat in strategy sessions. I nodded at his jokes. Behind the scenes, I flagged unusual timing on a couple of last-minute advisory invoices and quietly sent their details to Laura. Took notes when Ethan casually mentioned wanting to wrap certain things up before the big day, and checked our systems to see what he meant. Confirmed that 2 of the shell entities had recently increased their drawdowns, like he was trying to grab as much as he could before someone turned off the faucet. Each little piece went into the invisible file we were building. Meanwhile, the wedding machine ramped up. The firm buzzed with talk of outfits, accommodations, who got invited to the rehearsal dinner versus just the main event. Partners joked about which client they'd be stuck making small talk with at their table. Ethan seemed more relaxed than ever. One afternoon, he leaned against my desk and said, "You know, once this wedding circus is over, we're going to really expand with Mark's. Harper's family's been talking to some of their friends. Big capital, global stuff." I looked up at him, thinking, "You have no idea how done you are." "Sounds big," I said. "That's why I need you," he said. "We're going to build something massive, you and me. Legacy level. Legacy." If there was ever a word that needed to be dragged into the light in his case, it was that one. The night before the wedding, I barely slept. I'd backed up my personal files in 3 places. I'd printed a condensed version of the evidence timeline and tucked it in a sealed envelope at the bottom of my safe. I'd told exactly one close friend, in vague terms, that I might be making a big move at work that could change things. I didn't tell her details. I couldn't. The morning of the wedding, I got dressed slowly. The invitation had said black tie. I wore a long, dark green dress, elegant but simple, nothing too flashy. I put on minimal jewelry, did my makeup in a way that made me look awake even though I felt like my insides were vibrating. In my small evening bag, alongside my phone and lipstick, I tucked a tiny USB drive. It held one more copy of my summary, just in case. I doubted I'd need it. Laura had everything she needed now, but I felt better having it. As I rode the car out to the estate, the city gave way to leafy suburbs, then to long stretches of manicured nothing. The venue appeared like something out of a movie, a grand house with a circular driveway, lush gardens, white tents glowing softly in the early evening. Guests in gowns and tuxes milled around, champagne flutes already in hand. String music floated through the air. Waiters in white shirts and black vests moved like choreography. On the surface, it was perfect. Inside, a separate kind of choreography was in motion. The Marks Foundation board had been briefed in a closed session. Legal documents had been drafted, letters of termination, notices of breach, repayment demands. Key people like Davenport and a couple of major investors had been quietly told to expect developments. All that was left was timing. Ethan had always thought he was directing the show. Tonight, he was just the last one to realize someone else had rewritten the final scene. The estate looked like a movie set. By the time my car pulled up to the circular driveway, the sun was dipping low enough to make everything glow: stone walls, trimmed hedges, white floral arrangements lining the path to the main house. Waiters in black and white moved through the crowd with trays of champagne. A string quartet played something soft and expensive sounding near a fountain. Everyone looked perfect, which was funny considering what was about to happen. I checked in, got my little place card, and walked with the other guests toward the ceremony area. Rows of white chairs faced a floral archway. Beyond that, endless manicured lawn. I spotted a few familiar faces from the firm, partners in tuxes, junior staff in rented suits, investors with their spouses. I also recognized Davenport, the older LP from the photo, standing near a cluster of older men, drink in hand, expression unreadable. Our eyes met for a second. He gave the smallest nod. I didn't know how much he knew yet about what was coming, but that tiny acknowledgement steadied me. I found my seat, halfway back on the groom's side. Harper's people, the socialites, influencers, family friends, filled the other side with sequins and designer labels. The ceremony itself was fine. Harper looked stunning, of course, dressed like something out of a magazine, veil catching the light. Ethan looked exactly how he wanted to look, confident, composed, slightly humbled by love in front of a crowd. He said his vows. She said hers. People dabbed at their eyes. Phones went up for photos. If you didn't know what I knew, you'd think you were watching some kind of fairy tale. But as I listened to him talk about honor and building a life together and being worthy of the trust placed in me, something cold curled in my chest. This was a man who had signed settlement papers promising not to go after a family's wealth, then turned around and quietly siphoned money from their foundation anyway. If that's his idea of honor, I thought, I'd hate to see his idea of betrayal. When the officiant announced them husband and wife, and they kissed, the crowd erupted. Rose petals flew, music swelled, people laughed and clapped. I clapped too, not for the marriage, for the timing, because what Ethan didn't know was that the real show hadn't started yet. The reception was held under a massive white tent with crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. Tables were draped in linen, topped with towering floral centerpieces and enough glassware to start a small shop. The place cards were calligraphed. A live band played near the dance floor. I found my seat, table 9, with a mix of firm people and one or two more quietly wealthy guests. From where I sat, I had a clear line of sight to the head table where Ethan and Harper would sit with their families. I also had a good view of Laura. She arrived a little late to the tent, in a simple black gown, hair down for once. She moved through the room with practiced ease, stopping to greet some older relatives, shaking hands with a couple of board members. When her eyes met mine across the room, she didn't smile, but she gave a tiny tilt of her head. Tonight, that was enough. The first part of the reception was standard, cocktail hour gossip, overly plated appetizers, someone's uncle making a safe, slightly boring welcome speech. I forced myself to eat, knowing my adrenaline would burn through whatever I gave it. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't wobble. On the outside, I was just another guest. On the inside, I was very aware that at some point in the next couple of hours, the ground under Ethan's carefully built image was going to vanish. The cue came sooner than I expected. After the main course, as dessert plates were being cleared, the band quieted down and the MC tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention," he said. "We have a few special toasts lined up before we open the dance floor. First up, our groom, Ethan Blake." Polite applause. Ethan stood, straightened his jacket, and walked to the center, taking the mic with that self-assured half-smile. "Thank you," he said. "I'll keep this short, because I know the bar's open and the band is better looking than I am." Laughter. He waited for it, soaking it in. He started with the usual, thanking both families, talking about Harper, telling a couple of safe anecdotes that made everyone chuckle. He was good at this, just vulnerable enough, just polished enough. Then he pivoted. "You know," he said, "I wouldn't be standing here without a lot of people in this room. Not just family, but the people I've built things with. My partners, my investors, the clients who trusted us early on. People like the Marx Foundation, who showed me that finance can actually mean something beyond numbers. On a screen, real impact, real lives changed." My jaw clenched. Of course he was going to name check them. Of course he was going to stand here, in front of the very people he'd been quietly bleeding, and use their reputation as decoration. "Working with them," he continued, "has reminded me that success isn't just about what we keep, but what we give back. About legacy." The word hung there, thick, heavy. That was the moment. Because at the edge of the room, near one of the tent posts, I saw movement. Laura stepped forward from where she'd been standing with two older men, one of them her father, the other a board member I recognized from their sight. Beside them was a man in a dark suit I didn't know, but the look on his face screamed lawyer. The MC started to step back in, assuming Ethan was wrapping up. But Laura spoke, her voice carrying clearly even without a mic. "Actually," she said, "before we toast legacy, we need to address something." The tent went quiet in an instant. Every head turned. Ethan froze mid-sentence, mic halfway lowered, confusion flickering across his face. "Laura," he said, forcing a chuckle. "Hey, we can save the audit talk for Monday, right?" Nervous laughter from a few people. Most just watched. She walked toward the front, not rushing, not hesitating. The lawyer and the older men followed. A waiter, sensing something was off, edged away with his tray. "I won't take long," Laura said, stopping near the head table. "But tonight is about truth, isn't it? About vows and promises, and the kind of person you tie your future to." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Harper shifted in her seat, confusion knitting her brows. Harper's parents exchanged looks. Davenport leaned back in his chair, eyes sharp. "Ethan," Laura said, turning to face him fully, "my family trusted you with more than our investments. We trusted you with our name, our foundation, our donors' belief that their money was changing lives, not padding someone's pockets." His face tightened. "I think this can wait," he said quietly into the mic, trying to smile. "We're at my wedding." "That's exactly why it can't wait," she said. "Because you've built this image of yourself as a generous, trustworthy leader. And it's a lie." The word hung in the air like a slap. Somewhere behind me, someone gasped. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady in my lap. "I'm not sure what you think you're implying," Ethan said, his voice cool, but a vein in his neck had started to throb. Laura nodded to the lawyer, who pulled a thin folder from his briefcase. She took it, flipped it open, and held up a few pages. "For the last several months," she said, "our internal audit team has been reviewing the management of our education and entrepreneurship fund. We've traced a pattern of advisory and administrative fees flowing to entities you established or control, in clear violation of both our agreements and the settlement you signed when you divorced my aunt." Word divorced seemed to hit half the room harder than violation. Divorced my aunt. I watched the realization spread like a slow wave, people turning to each other, whispering, eyebrows raised. Harper's face went chalk white. Ethan laughed weakly. "This is ridiculous. You're misinterpreting complex structures. We can discuss this privately with the appropriate people." This is exactly where it belongs," she cut in, voice still even. "In front of the investors you've charmed, the colleagues you've used, and the wife you've just promised to honor. They deserve to know what you've really been doing under the banner of impact." The lawyer stepped forward then, handing Ethan an envelope. "Mr. Blake," he said, "on behalf of the Marx Family Foundation and the Marx family, You are hereby notified of your immediate removal from any authority over our funds, pending further legal action, are demanding repayment of misused amounts and reserving our right to pursue civil and regulatory remedies. Ethan stared at the envelope like it was a snake. This is insane, he snapped. You can't just, this is my wedding. You're humiliating yourselves more than me. Humiliation, Laura said quietly, is something my aunt handled alone when you walked away from her and tried to turn her family's legacy into your side hustle. This isn't humiliation. This is accountability. I don't know who started it, but somewhere in the back, someone clapped. Just one person, then another, not loud, not a standing ovation, more like a small ripple of approval from people who'd seen powerful men skate for too long. Harper stood up then, slowly. Ethan, she said, her voice low, but amplified by the mic still in his hand. Is this true? He turned to her, eyes wide, all the charm gone. They're twisting things, he said. You know how complex this stuff is. Of course my name is on documents. I run the team. It's technical. It's not. Is it true? She repeated. And in that moment, with hundreds of eyes on him, he did what men like him always do when cornered. He tried to spread the blame. If there were mistakes, they weren't just mine, he said, pointing into the room. My team handled allocations. Analysts did the models. Partners approved structures. We all built this. You can't pin it on me alone. I felt my spine go cold. There it was. The threat I'd always known was possible. His willingness to drag us all into the fire with him. But this time, his performance didn't land, because Laura was ready. We're aware others signed off on things they shouldn't have, she said. We'll address that with them directly. Some have already begun cooperating. Her gaze swept the room, and for a fraction of a second, brushed past me. We know who followed orders and who designed the scheme. Word cooperating was a lifeline thrown my way without anyone else noticing. Ethan noticed. His eyes snapped to me, like he'd only just realized I was in the room. Our gazes locked, and I watched understanding hit him like a truck. You, he said, the mic picking up the word before he could stop it. He took a step toward my table, hand tightening around the mic, so hard his knuckles went white. You did this, he said, voice low and vicious. After everything I did for you. There it was. Not what I did to them. What I did to him. I stood up. My legs felt surprisingly solid. I did my job, I said, keeping my voice calm. I followed the money. That's what you paid me for, remember? A few people near us turned fully to watch. This was the part where, in his mind, I was supposed to shrink, apologize, deny. I didn't. You used my work to help hide this, I continued. You used my reputation to make people trust your numbers. You gambled with other people's futures because you thought you were smarter than everyone else. I just stopped letting you. For a moment, the only sound in the tent was the wind brushing the fabric. His jaw worked, like he was searching for words. You'll never work in this town again, he hissed finally, dropping the mic just low enough that only the closest tables clearly heard it. No one trusts a traitor. I almost smiled. Then I'll go somewhere no one trusts you either, I said. Someone at the back of the tent laughed, short and sharp. Harper, to her credit, didn't make a scene. She just stepped away from him very slowly and removed her hand from his arm like it burned. I'll be with my parents, she said to no one in particular, then turned and walked toward their table, dress whispering over the floor. Her father stood as she approached, expression thunderous, not at her. At him. Around the room, the shift was palpable. Some investors moved away from Ethan like proximity itself was dangerous. Firm partners looked at each other with the panicked eyes of men mentally drafting statements about shocked and disappointed leadership. A couple of junior staffers traded glances that said what they couldn't say out loud. Finally, the band, bless them, started playing something soft, like they'd been given a signal to gently drown out the chaos. Eventually, the MC did what he could to transition the evening, guiding people toward the bar, suggesting folks take a moment outside, enjoy the grounds. Ethan disappeared. I didn't see which direction he went in. I didn't follow. The rest of the night felt like the aftermath of a storm that hadn't quite finished. Small clusters of people whispered in corners. Some left early. Others stayed, probably because they'd traveled too far to go home after 10 minutes of drama. I stepped outside at one point, needing air. The gardens were lit by fairy lights. The night was cool. Somewhere far off, you could hear distant traffic, but here, everything felt oddly still. I was staring at a row of roses when I heard footsteps behind me. "Not the worst wedding I've been to," Laura said drily. I huffed out a small laugh. "You have a dark metric for that." She came to stand beside me. For a minute, we just looked at the lights. "You did well in there," she said. "I didn't do anything," I said. "You did the heavy lifting." "I just lit the fuse," she finished. "Don't undersell that." We stood in silence a moment longer. "I'm not going back to the firm after this," I said quietly. It wasn't a question, it was just me finally saying out loud what I already knew. "I didn't think you would," she said. "There will be fallout, investigations. Spin. They'll circle the wagons and look for scapegoats. If you want, my counsel can talk to you about protections, whistleblower status, that kind of thing." "I'd appreciate that," I said. "You'll land on your feet," she added. "People like you usually do. Eventually, people like me. People who don't look away when it would be easier," she said simply. I didn't trust my voice enough to answer. In the weeks that followed, everything changed and nothing did. The firm announced that Ethan was taking a leave of absence to address personal matters. Internally, everyone knew that meant he was done, even if they didn't say it yet. Rumors flew about regulators sniffing around, about the Marx Foundation pulling their portfolio, about other clients quietly asking, "So, what really happened?" I resigned 2 days after the wedding. No big speech, no dramatic exit, just a concise email, a short meeting with HR, a walk out of the building carrying a box of my things. No one stopped me. Ethan didn't call. That was fine. I'd heard enough from him. For a while, life was weird. Whistleblowing, even unofficially, is not glamorous. It's lonely. Some people at the firm unfollowed me on social media. One or two reached out quietly to say they were proud of me, but couldn't say anything publicly right now. I had trouble sleeping. Sometimes I'd jolt awake at 3 a.m., thinking I'd made a huge mistake, that I'd torpedoed my career for nothing. I'd remember the scholarship student crying in her car, the shuttered incubator, the programs that never launched. And I'd remember the look on Ethan's face when he realized he wasn't untouchable. That made it easier. Laura kept her word. Her team looped me in as a cooperating witness. I gave a formal statement, walked them through my analysis, handed over my documentation. I had my own counsel by then, someone who made sure I didn't hang myself with my own thoroughness. It wasn't fun, but it felt clean. The Marx Foundation put out a carefully worded statement months later. They acknowledged serious lapses in the management of a portion of their funds. They announced reforms, new oversight, reclaimed amounts. They did not name Ethan publicly, but anyone who paid attention could connect the dots. As for Ethan, he didn't go to prison, at least not in the short term. Rich men like him rarely do right away. But he lost his seat at the table. He lost the Marx account, which was a cornerstone of his image. He lost other clients who quietly backed away. He lost his position at the firm. He lost the marriage he'd just begun. Harper filed for an annulment within weeks, citing material misrepresentation. And maybe most importantly, he lost the one thing he'd relied on most, people's automatic belief in his story. Every room he walked into after that, he carried the echo of that night. As for me, I took some time off. I traveled a little. I slept. I went whole days without opening a spreadsheet. I let myself feel everything I'd been too busy to feel. Anger, fear, pride, grief for the version of my life I thought I was building. Eventually, I started consulting, ironically, helping smaller organizations and foundations build systems that made this kind of quiet siphoning harder. I took the thing Ethan had trained in me, this ability to see around corners, to notice patterns, and used it for people who actually gave a damn about where their money went. One afternoon, months later, I walked past that same used bookstore. The bell over the door jingled when I went in. The owner looked up, gave me the same nod. "Back again," he said. "Yeah," I said, smiling a little. "Guess I like getting lost." I wandered the aisles, ran my fingers over the spines. At the back, in the business section, I saw the gap where that old blue hardcover had been. It had probably been reshelved, resold, or tossed by now. The photo was gone too, of course. Not physically. I still had it in a drawer at home. But it wasn't a mystery anymore. Just evidence from a story I'd already seen through to the end. Standing there, I realized something. I used to think my life revolved around people like Ethan, geniuses, rainmakers, visionaries. Like my worth was measured by how useful I was to them. Now, I'd watched one of them fall. I'd helped push, and the world kept spinning. I didn't regret it. Not the long nights piecing together the puzzle. Not the risk. Not the quiet way my old life burned down. If anything, the only thing I regretted was how long it took me to stop believing I owed him my loyalty. Look, I'm not saying everyone should blow up their career over a spreadsheet. I know not everyone has the safety net, the options, the stubborn streak I do. But I will say this, if you ever find yourself holding proof that someone powerful is stealing from people who can't afford to lose, it changes you. You can't unsee it. You can't unknow it. And you either decide you're okay being part of that machine, or you break it as much as you can. I chose to break it. Now I sleep at night. So, what would you have done in my place? If you found out your boss was quietly siphoning money from a foundation meant to fund scholarships and small businesses, would you risk your job, your reputation, your whole trajectory to expose them? Do you think Ethan deserved to have his image shattered at his own rich, perfect wedding, in front of all the people who'd believed in him? Or would you have handled it quietly, behind closed doors? If you've ever had a boss who thought they were untouchable, or if you've been the one to finally pull back the curtain on someone's lies, drop your story in the comments. Your letter to karma might be the next one we read on Karma's letterbox.